Has anybody ever used or had a on-demand water heater? No, eh?
No.
I had one years ago in Spain.
Yeah, I was going to say yes, but not in Canada.
We do, Jim.
And how is it? Does it work well for you?
I like it very much.
Hmm.
The only thing at least from our experience, is depending on which tap you're using, there is a delay until you get hot water.
Yeah.
Um, so what I do, if I'm doing dishes, for example, I use that water to rinse some of the dishes. Some of it I capture if I have in a large pot. I put it in the garden because it's not dirty. Or if it's a smaller amount, I put it in our compost pail so that it's everything in the compost is wet when it goes into the larger one in the back lane.
Hmm.
I have a friend who has an on-demand, and he keeps it on during the day. He keeps it on, ready to go. So he said it's still not using very much power,
Right.
but you don't have to wait so long for it to produce the heat. I'm not sure why he would do that, but he said it took a long time to generate hot water.
There is a device which you can buy for an on-demand, which raises the temperature, something like you're talking about. But that, of course, uses more energy.
Yeah.
So we decided not to opt for that because the reason we wanted it in the first place was to try and save
Hmm.
energy.
Well, thanks.
My daughter lives at Skaha Towers, the two huge towers near Skaha Lake, and they're all of that is on demand
Oh,
in those towers.
cool.
Mark, where is the on-demand hot water heater located in relation to where it's used?
I think they have two.
Yeah.
Ours is in our indoor garage.
My experience, my first experience with them, living outside of Canada, there was one in the kitchen and there was one in the bathroom.
Mm.
So there was no debate. They were right there. But we are not used to, culturally, we're not used to seeing our hot water heaters. And so we think we're going to put them, under the stairs or, in the utility area and get the same performance that we're going to get from a tank. And it is a little bit different.
If I can just offer a comment, if you're familiar with the YouTube site, Just Have a Think, they do weekly and monthly episodes. Just in the last week, they did one on a UK-based water heater, and I can't access it right now, but it's just a variation on a conventional water heater, but it recirculates at the top of the tank, so you're not having to heat the whole tank. There's a temperature gradient there. And there was some, if you went to Just Have a Think, you would get a list of all of the episodes that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks everyone for that great discussion. That was a good question, Jim. I think we'll start the evening. So if I could ask you to, for now, during the presentation, turn off your microphones, that would be super. Good evening, everybody.
Look at the poll?
Well, maybe let's do that just before the presentation starts. How about? If that's okay, Lori. I thought I'd begin this evening with our traditional land acknowledgement, which is to say that those of us fortunate enough to live here in the beautiful Okanagan Valley, we live on the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nations. This is an acknowledgement of the land, but in the past month, I think all of us as Canadians, we've become aware that we must also acknowledge and come to terms with the history and the current realities of settler and First Nations communities. So wearing an orange shirt honors the Indigenous children who were sent away to residential schools. And by wearing an orange t-shirt, you're also starting a conversation with people around you. Jim mentioned wearing an orange shirt during Aboriginal Day and going out to a public meeting, and there were quite a few people that he engaged about what it signified. So each month we try and connect with the SEAL community here in Penticton, and we want to mention Red Nation's Design. It's a store in Cherry Lane Shopping Center. It sells all manner of apparel, as well as household gifts and goods, and they have wonderful First Nations orange t-shirts with significant writing on them. You may wish to purchase one. So drop into Red Nation, buy a t-shirt, have a chat with the owners, and support a local First Nations business. At First Things First, we have done some joint programming with people from the Anauken Center, instructors and students, and we hope to be doing more in the future as well. But for now, we're very much looking forward to our program tonight. But I actually have one more thing to mention, and that is, if you're interested in learning more about Indigenous Canada, the history, there is a link in the chat. Lori has attended this course, which is offered free by the University of Alberta. Lots of wonderful videos. It's all, you can do it at your own pace. It's a very worthwhile course that I've talked to several people that have done it, and it's worth looking into. So if you'd like to learn more about our Canadian history as it relates to First Nations. So our monthly deep dive discussions hosted by First Things First Okanagan. We're a local nonprofit society. Our mission is to promote awareness of climate change and to work to find solutions for a better future here in our community and in our province, in Canada. This is our 9th deep dive. I think Lori, Sue, and I are all feeling like we need a summer break, but we will be back offering new programs in the fall. I'm going to pass, Lori Goldman is our Zoom technician as always, so if you have any problems at all with the controls, you can always talk to her in chat. Tonight's session is being recorded and we'll post it on our private YouTube channel, which you'll get a link to. So if you know anyone that you talked to that missed the evening's program, they can have a look at it. I'm going to pass things over to Sue Kirschman, also on the board of First Things First, co-host for this evening, and she's going to introduce the evening's topic and our special guest.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before I introduce our topic and guest speaker, I just wanted to comment on the strange weather we've been having this spring. It's been flip-flopping between abnormally cool and then hot, and now it's getting too hot and so very dry. And to me, these are clear indications that our climate is already disrupted and a reminder that we can't delay taking action. As I'm sure you're all aware, the main cause of climate change is heat-trapping gases, mostly carbon dioxide, that are emitted when we burn fossil fuels. So the most effective action we can take is to reduce our use of fossil fuels. As a nation, Canada has committed to reduce emissions by at least 40% by the year 2030, which is now only 8.5 years away. It's a daunting task, to reduce emissions by so much and so quickly. But there's also good news. There are a number of benefits associated with switching to renewable sources of energy, which is one of the things our guest speaker, Dave Mills, will talk about. Dave is a Cascadian, born in Seattle and raised in BC. He's worked across 3 sectors of the economy: resource extraction, public service, and nonprofit. He's been with Dogwood for 7 years. For those of you that don't know, Dogwood is a BC-based campaigning organization with a large and active list of members. At Dogwood, Dave sits on the strategy team and is the organizing programs manager responsible for delivering their local power campaign, which focuses on community decarbonization. Dave is a very busy person, and we're so pleased to have him here tonight. As he's speaking, if you have any questions or comments, just type them into the chat and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dave, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thanks to First Things First Okanagan for hosting this. I hope it'll be an entertaining and fun and informative presentation, and hopefully a good discussion afterwards. So yeah, as Sue mentioned, I've been campaigning with Dogwood for about 7 years, and the local power initiative is sort of the latest iteration of our climate campaigning that began way back in 2007 when we switched gears from campaigning on forestry to campaigning on energy. And maybe our most notable achievement would be constructing the idea of Blockadia, where you look at a particular pipeline project and you devise a strategy that the proponent and the government has to build the entire thing. You as an opponent only have to stop one segment of it. And based on that strategy, our No Tankers campaign was born, which is the campaign that put our organization on the map and eventually grew our subscriber list to about 250,000 British Columbians. These days, we're operating at a little bit lower capacity. It's always easier to be a campaigner when you have politicians in power that sort of generate the that confrontational space. So I'm thinking about our Stephen Harpers and Christy Clarks, who are very pro-energy, very bullish on Canadian energy, and not moving as far on climate as many Canadians at the time would have liked. All that aside, that's how I began campaigning with Dogwood. And when I started work on local power, the thing that I really gravitated to quickly is that the climate crisis is an energy problem. It's the decisions that we make about energy that drive it. And I think when I understood that, I started to change the way I was thinking about campaigning. Saying no all the time isn't going to provide people with the solutions they need to actually make the switch. So when we started to bring local power into the picture, the idea was to find out the solutions that were working in communities and try to highlight them, bring them to the fore, and open discussions about them. As you all know, it's the discussions between neighbors that have the biggest impact, just like we're having tonight. You're talking about the hot water tanks, what works, what doesn't. Like, that's literally how people get into the new hot water tank or whatever. So I'm going to go through some slides. I'll give you a quick little bit of background about the climate crisis. I'll move through some decarbonization solutions. We'll take a look at some of the innovative things that communities in BC are doing, and then open the floor to discussion. If I am going too fast, or if there's something that you really like to either challenge or clarify, feel free to unmute, and I'm happy to stop and sort of address it or open up a discussion on it. So if that's okay with you, I'll get started.
Just before you begin, we're going to just have a quick look at our poll to see how many people use natural gas, etc.
Okay.
Participants today still with 43%. Okay, of people are using natural gas as their primary heating source.
Okay, so that's a little bit lower than the BC average.
It looks like 71% want to switch, so that's wonderful. Thanks, Lori.
Okay. Let's move this out of the way. Okay, so here's our local power logo, and here's my youngest son who's at home with me now, and my older kids over here who've moved out. This is like a snapshot of my life. I spent a lot of time organizing community groups like these fine people here in the Comox Valley. I might mention that I live in Courtenay, unceded Comox territory, sort of wedged right between Kwakwaka'wakw and Coast Salish nations. In my campaigning with Dogwood, you know, I get to do really fun things like meet cabinet members and caucus members in government. I had the opportunity to fly out to Prince Edward Island and help the Greens try to secure a sort of groundbreaking entrance into provincial government. I organize things like federal election debates. And in my spare time at home during the winter, I'm a children's biathlon coach, mostly safety and supervision. I'm definitely no pro biathlon athlete, but it's a great hobby that I've taken up later in life. And of course, I love getting out in the outdoors and enjoying the things that I like to protect. The thing that struck me this year when I was looking at our emissions scenario was a paper I wrote back in 2004. And no, sorry, 1994. So in 1994, I was finishing up my science degree at UVic, and fourth year geography class, I wrote a paper on climate change. And just this past winter, I was down in the crawl space looking for a winter coat. I tipped over a box and outspilled all my papers from back in the day. And that was a real-time work to go through those. All the projections from back in the mid-90s about what our worst case solutions were in the climate crisis are today's best case, and in many cases out of reach. And the other set of papers in the box actually was from my friend's project. Back in 1994, students at UVic built Canada's first hydrogen-powered car. They had a fuel cell donated by Ballard Transportation Systems in Burnaby. They took an old Ford Taurus and they literally built a hydrogen-powered car at UVic. And of course, you might remember at that time that there were EVs out on the road. So we're going back 25 years, and we knew all the problems in very fine detail. All the models checked out. The only thing that went wrong was the assumptions about the action that would be taken. So we knew all the science and we had all the technology 25 years ago. Since that time, we've really heard one message from the oil industry, and that's we're not getting off oil. It would be too costly, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was really shocking to literally find all this evidence just sitting in my basement of where we were at a quarter century ago. So needless to say, we've been going in the wrong direction. So our emissions in BC are staggeringly bad. We have this reputation as being like clean BC and supernatural BC. It's so far from the truth. We're getting close to 14 tons per person per year of emissions, a staggering amount. The world average is 6. And as you all know, we really need to get that world average down to 3 very quickly. And I think about like an industrialized country like Sweden or Norway, both who have like extensive forestry and oil and gas industries like we do, yet somehow their emissions manage to be at 6 tons per person. Their people are wealthier. They have a robust manufacturing systems, like they make their own chainsaws in Sweden. Like we buy Swedish chainsaws if we want a log. They make their own cars in Sweden. In Norway, they have their own oil and gas industry. They own it. The benefits go to the people. In BC, like we've really slipped off the map in terms of productivity, and obviously we're going the wrong way. This chart says it all. 2018, we had a period when Gordon Campbell came in, brought in the carbon tax. We actually saw emissions flatline and start to decline for a bit. But since that time, they're really skyrocketing now, growing 3% a year. Where do they come from? They come mostly from transportation, oil and gas, and buildings. Those are those big pulses of energy that we use, heating spaces and moving to places. And then, of course, the extractive activities that create the fuel that we use to do those 2 key things. So those are like the big pulses of emissions. Those percentages haven't changed too much in the last little while, though it's interesting that transportation is actually really growing. And you'd think that would be odd as our emission standards have gotten better over time. The car companies have typically been creating more fuel efficient vehicles in North America. So why are our emissions going up? Partly it's population growth, but it's also the decisions we're making. We're choosing huge cars. The most popular vehicle in Canada is the F-150. So a lot of the consumer decisions around that are shaping the trajectory of those emissions. You know the result. This is your forecast for the next week. I don't need to tell you any of this. And I also don't need to tell you what some of the big repercussions are to both our own human and wildlife communities. This is all stuff you know. So the more interesting part that we at Dogwood explore as we're sort of devising campaigns to help people understand this is like, well, how do we get here in the first place? And some of the really interesting, well, I'll just run through this. First of all, like the most important thing is pollution pretty much has always been free. So there's really never been a cost to you if you emit from your vehicle, from your house, with the factories. There's pollution's more or less been free. When was that not the case? That was not the case sort of around Kyoto in the mid-90s when acid rain was a really big problem. At that point, governments intervened and brought in very stiff regulations on certain types of emissions, and actually very quickly got both acid rain and the ozone depleting substances under control. So there was the Kyoto Accord, the Montreal Protocol, and all these sort of moments in the mid-90s where we actually sort of got a handle on things. And that sort of takes me back to when I graduated from UVic. You know, I had all this knowledge on climate change, but yet climate change was just one of the problems. You know, there was habitat destruction, there was overfishing in the oceans, there was the ozone layer, there was acid rain. Climate change was just a part of the problem. And what we saw in the mid-90s was government sort of turning its attention and quickly tackling a couple of key areas. And they did so successfully. And I think that lulled many of us who maybe would have kept campaigning on climate way back then in the mid-90s kind of to sleep, because we could see, and climate scientists and other environmental specialists could see that the government could actually tackle these problems. So climate change maybe wasn't seen to be as big of a problem as it's become, because we actually did see government take collaborative international action that had visible, meaningful impacts. We weren't the only ones to notice that. The people who really noticed were the oil and gas industry. And from that point forward, the level of lobbying, outright climate change denial, and bribery of politicians was probably ramped up by a factor of 100, maybe 1,000. So the types of things that, the types of ad campaigns that classic campaigns over the time, over the years about persuasion and consumer satisfaction, all that money, all those lobbying efforts were poured into oil and gas. And I love the photo or this poster of the doctor smoking a Camel cigarette. It's just this classic type of advertising that can take something that is just like so obviously toxic and bad for you, put it in the hands of like a trusted health professional. And there you are, you've got a campaign that's going to generate 10 to 15 to 20 years of smoking uptake. The same thing has been happening with oil and gas for as long as any of us can remember. Some modern versions of that are the gas campaigns that run in the United States right now. These are Instagram influencers who love cooking with gas. These types of maybe more what you call subliminal efforts to sort of persuade us that we're just going to get the best sear if we cook with gas, or, you know, the pictures say it all. And then, of course, we've got the concentration of power in the big utilities. So whether they're electrical utilities or transnational energy companies, or the transnational manufacturing companies like car companies that use the products, the power of these industry associations when they band together are enormous. The amount of wealth that they yield is stupendous. The amount of influence they can generate. You know, we all saw that happen here in British Columbia when all of a sudden a province that was a sort of forestry and fishing and mining turned into a natural gas juggernaut, and natural gas was going to save us. That didn't come out of nowhere. That's just hardcore lobbying from big industry and big money to try to get their claws into British Columbia. And the final thing I want to mention with climate and how we got here is the responsibility that each of us as large emitters have. We have a huge stake in this. So it's just a fact that wealthy people emit far, far more energy and emissions, use far more energy, emit far more than poor people. So these are just facts, like we were talking about residential schools and the facts of our history. The facts are that wealthy people, they fly, they have larger homes, they own multiple vehicles. You know, they got to heat those larger homes, they got to fuel those larger cars, they're going to travel over the place. Their emission factors are 10 to 100 times more than what poor people contribute. So that's how we got here. Any questions on that? Maybe I'll just quickly stop and check in. Any questions on the kind of how we got here piece?
I was just thinking that you're saying in the 90s, we knew all of the science and we had all the technology. My memory was that in the 70s, we knew all the science and we had all the technology. That's when I was going to university, and we did.
Yeah, that must feel frustrating.
It's very upsetting.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll carry on then. Okay, so you've been told for the last couple of decades that the transition is going to cost you jobs and wreck the economy. So just put that all out of your head and just think about the opportunity of decarbonization. It's not that hard. Okay, whoa. Okay, so what have we got? We've got electric cars or electric bikes or whatever. The electrification of transportation, dead simple. The technology is way simpler. It's way cheaper. I think this is all stuff you know as well. There's no mystery to an electric vehicle. If you think about World War II and the submarines, they were diesel powered until they weren't. Like the diesel would generate the batteries and they got close to the ships. They went all electric, so that was the first hybrid engines built in the late 30s, powered the submarines, quiet as a mouse. They could sneak up to their prey, all powered by electric batteries. So here we are today. We finally have all the options and the affordability is getting close. In fact, if you factor in gas usage right now, electric cars already are more affordable. They're only going to be dramatically more so in the days to come. This is your classic air source heat pump. This is the sort of technology that's won the residential home heating race. There are different heat pump technologies, ground source and geothermal and natural gas combined. But the air source heat pump, very common in South Asia, like Korea, Japan, and Europe. This technology is proven. It works in cold climates. It's maybe not going to work in the Arctic right now. So, it's not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to heat 90% of Canadians' homes with existing technology. And we now have the ability to, if we buy those two things and increase our electrical capacity, we have extraordinarily affordable solar power that we can put up on our roof right now that has dropped in price so dramatically over the past couple of years. No one projected this. Like, no one thought we'd be seeing solar prices fall this far, this quickly. So it's now, if you're lucky with the roof facing the right way and live in a somewhat sunny climate, you can make these investments now that will start saving you money the minute you plug them in, and you can generate all the power that you need to power both those electric appliances that take care of the heating your spaces and moving to places as we discussed. So what does that look like in Penticton? By my guess, there's like 19,000 homes in Penticton. In the Okanagan, the average home uses 11 megawatts a year, and EV uses 3 to 4. So to complete that transaction yourself, a 12 kilowatt installation, which is not a huge installation. Most average roofs can handle, actually most small roofs can handle a 12 kilowatt installation. The total cost for that to be your net zero your own home is $24,000. That's a system that, say the average is 25 years, so the solar installers I know say they'll last easily 35. But say it's an average life expectancy of 25 years. Right now, money's really cheap, so it's not a huge stretch to imagine borrowing $25,000 out of your own home's line of credit, putting on a 12 kilowatt installation and having enough power to completely power your home, completely power your car. So right there, that's the opportunity. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of money that used to be leaving your house. And let's just think for a second about where that money went when you left the house. So you went to Esso, or you went to Shell, or you went to Petro-Canada, and you put gas in your tank and filled up your car, and you paid the bill. And every cent of that, every cent of profit of that left the province, because none of those companies provided none of those companies are based in British Columbia that provide that gas. And same when you decide to turn your thermostat and fire your furnace up, you're drawing gas from a pretty major utility called Fortis. Fortis is not a British Columbia based company. So again, all the profits that Fortis collects are leaving the province. So all of a sudden, the decisions that you make to become carbon neutral in your own home, the money that is redirected flows to the contractors who put the panels on your roof and then install your heat pumps. And unfortunately, we didn't get on the ball quick enough to build our own electric cars. So you're still going to be spending your money buying a foreign produced car. But all that energy money that you've been spending year after year after year that's been leaving the province, it's going to stay in BC. And that's a great thing. It's a transformational thing. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we're missing when we're thinking about the energy transition, is just the amount of extra money and capital that's redirected locally into our economies. So quick thought experiment here. That 12 kilowatt installation, let's just say we arbitrarily up that to 16 kilowatts. So you produce an extra 4 kilowatts. You are so lucky. You live in Penticton, and your city is a utility. They could be your customer, or they could be your partner. And all of a sudden, you could be supplying your city with all the power it needs. So thought experiment goes like this. Say everybody in Penticton, it's not possible, the roofs aren't right, but say those 19,000 homes put an extra 4 kilowatts up. That would be equivalent to the 1/5 of the total power generated for all of Vancouver Island. So Vancouver Island population, like 380,000 people, just adding an extra 4 kilowatts of power to the rooftops in Penticton would provide a 1/5 of the power generated on Vancouver Island. So a great opportunity then to partner with your local utility to supply them with energy. So right now they're getting their electrical energy from Fortis, and Fortis might be getting some from BC Hydro and some from installations it has, and some from importing from across the line. Depending on what the price is, it could be that residents of Penticton could provide their utility with power at a much cheaper rate than a large utility like Fortis can. That's not out of the ballpark of reality. So let's just say you did that. Let's say all of you became suppliers of not only your own power, but that additional power that Penticton had. So all of a sudden, Penticton has a bunch of people living here who don't actually require energy and are net producers. All of a sudden, there is a huge surplus of power sitting around your city. So what can you do with that? Well, what's hot right now? Like Bitcoin mining is hot. All these information technologies they require tons of energy. So all of a sudden you're producing clean energy and you have a lot of extra. So how hard is it going to be for you to attract some of those big tech investments that are being made in places of the world that can provide power? So let's get back to thinking about the transition as a lot of upside, lots of opportunity. So what are we waiting for? That's kind of the next question, right? Like, what's holding us back? Transitions happen way faster than you think. I'm sure you've seen this photo somewhere. This is the same street, the same city, about a decade apart. On the left, there's not a single car, and on the right, there's only one horse. That's a decade. This transition is what we're in right now. And it's only going to get faster. Like, we're not going back. We're not going back to combustion engines. We're not going back to big oil and gas companies. This transition is underway. If you get there first, your city is going to be the city that's going to attract the investment capital of people who recognize this transition is underway. These are the smartest people. These are the most innovative people. These are the most efficient and effective people. This is what happened over 100 years ago. It's happening now. There's a huge advantage to going first because of the sort of like the opposite of a brain drain. You just attract all the talent who's already thinking about this. So what are some examples of other places in BC that are ahead of the curve? Top of the list is the town of Hudson's Hope, way up in the north, working collaboratively with their citizens. So there's a citizen-led co-op there called Peace Energy Co-op, which you can be a member of, by the way, in Penticton. You can be a member of Peace Energy Co-op and join their bulk buys to get lower prices on things like solar panels. I recommend checking out their website and even joining them. So they partnered with their city to turn this northern town into maybe Canada's most solar friendly city with great outcomes. You know, the district of Hudson's Hope is saving a ton of money on their energy bills and have created an innovative economy. City of Nanaimo passed a resolution to develop what essentially is a zero waste economy, a circular economy, which eliminates a lot of the bad things about our consumer life and starts generating jobs and opportunities by reusing and recirculating the wealth that naturally flows into our big cities. The city of West Vancouver has just decided to move to step 5 on the building code, which effectively means that the houses that are built in West Van are going to be there for the long haul. They're going to be energy efficient, they'll be gas free. So that's an option for cities as well, I think. Step 5, I don't think is required until 2032. So West Van is a full decade ahead, which means they're going to have the best builders show up in their community. Their emissions are going to drop faster. Of course, there's costs. It costs more to build at step 5, and but it's an example. And of course, the city of Vancouver has a comprehensive climate emergency plan, and they're really the leaders on climate in Canada, on par with a few cities in the United States, like San Francisco, with sort of top to bottom climate plans that are going to start covering through bylaws and regulations all the emissions sectors. The biggest one is the gas ban, which takes place in January, almost rolled back last 2 weeks ago. Very scary moment. So I'll send a link out when I share the slides by email. All the links are in here for you to take a look at. So Dogwood's plan in the next phase is to take the local power campaign and sort of give it a bit more teeth. We found that the solution side of campaigning has been some of the most effective campaigning that we've done, but we're finding the barrier, of course, in the provincial government. First, it was with BC Hydro and Site C, and of course, now it's the subsidies for the oil and gas industry. So we're going to keep developing the organizing work with teams across BC We're going to keep producing all the visual media and content and explainers and these types of things. We'll keep writing, keep the social media going. We're going to keep the webinars going. They've all been really great for us. We're just going to add a bit of the edge back. So we're going to start going after the government a lot harder for the amount of money they contribute to fueling the climate crisis. And it is really interesting to be in supernatural, clean, progressive BC and see the staggering amount of taxpayer money flowing directly into foreign fracking companies. It's incredible. So we've had enough of that, and we're done playing nice. So I'll stop there, and hopefully we have some time to dig into a few more of these solutions, and we can talk about technology and some of the things that we sort of know works best and are proven today. And I'll answer any questions that you have or comments that you have to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Dave. So far, we've had just a tiny bit of discussion in the chat. I encourage people to put more questions in there. Someone mentioned that they heard that solar systems for a house required a lot of knowledge and they're kind of a hassle to run. Someone else replied that their family in Kansas had it and they felt that managing the solar panels really was no problem at all. I know you might have a comment on that, and I believe that Patrick with us here has solar panels on his house, and he can maybe make a comment on that too, about whether or not it's an easy technology to have in your home.
We don't have to lift a finger, basically, other than plugging in our electric car. Because it goes directly, the solar electricity generated goes directly into the grid. We paid for all of our home use electricity, including charging our car this month. And in the past, as the weather is increasingly warm, of course, with certain obvious bad side effects, we'll generate more. Last year, we paid for all of our utilities, sewer, gas, water, for our electric stove and our on demand. So I guess need to be slapped for that. But really, we used Argonne, and I'm just mentioning them as one of the contractors in the area out of Oliver. You don't do anything. There's no maintenance. There's no batteries. I mean, I guess there is maintenance at some point, but we put ours in 3 years ago, and we haven't had any trouble at all.
Thank you, Patrick. Pauline Tinka has a question. Go ahead, Pauline.
Hi, I'm a high school teacher, and I have a question. The kids have really absorbed one of the narratives that EVs and solar panels can actually be worse because of the extraction of lithium, etc., and the manufacture of the solar panels, and of course the human rights abuses that are often associated with this. And I was wondering if you had some tips on how to respond to that.
Sure. I mean, that is a commonly raised, what's the word? Well, I'm not going to say it's a red herring. There's nothing that we do as modern industrial societies that is free from harm. So it doesn't matter what we're building, coal plant, solar plant, electric car, gas car, we're going to dig stuff out of the ground. We're going to weld it together. We're going to use energy. So the comparative question there, I think, is a moot point. So yes, lithium is maybe not the world's most friendly mineral, and maybe the miners who have traditionally mined it don't have a tremendous track record. But do you remember the war in Iraq? Why did we go there? Why did we go to Iraq? Why did we go into Venezuela? It's these types of sort of multi-decade, protracted, large-scale military conflicts that have centered around oil and gas for all our modern history. In the last 50 years, how many wars have been fought over oil and gas, and Angola, and civil wars in Nigeria, and on it goes. So yes, there is a price for our modern way of life, and we should do what we can to minimize that to the highest standard we possibly can. But to compare the technology transition between the two as one of going from what we know to something that is dirtier or more toxic or more dangerous is just wrong. It's just plain wrong. You're on mute, Margaret.
Thank you. Anne has a question about solar power in Penticton. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, thanks for all your inspiring comments, Dave. We were talking about that concept of if all the houses in Penticton put solar panels on and they all generated, you know, an extra few kilowatts of power and fed it back into the grid, what could happen. But Margaret, you might know more about this. It seems to me that there is a restriction on solar panels in Penticton, and that you're not allowed to generate more power than you use. And I remember Margaret and I both sit on the city sustainability committee. And I remember when they were talking about this, I remember that was one of those, you know, things that kind of struck me as, well, that's really odd. Like, why would you do that? And to me, that's a barrier. And I'm wondering, is that a common thing? Do you know why? Is there ways to overcome those kinds of barriers?
It is very common. It's tied up in the dynamics of utilities. So the dynamic of the utility is that, for example, you're grid tied with your solar installation. So you're not your own entity. You're depending on the utilities infrastructure to transfer the power, you know, literally back to your own house. So as Patrick said, you know, it's a simple system in that your solar panels are feeding the grid, and the grid is feeding your panel, your electrical panel, and it's really just an accounting practice around power. So the utilities who've invested in the lines, the poles, the meters, the infrastructure, like if the point comes where you're never paying for anything and they're also sort of having to pay you to be a generator, well, you didn't really participate in the creation of all the infrastructure that delivers that power. So most utilities have tried to limit the amount that customers use to just zero, like zero your own bill. We're not going to pay you any additional money. 10 years ago, when utilities were trying to interest people in it and get the first early adopters in, that's when you saw the net metering programs be a bit more generous. But, you know, as a utility, I think Penticton's could take a second look at this. Maybe when they had this policy 4 to 5 years ago or whenever it was created, you know, the dynamics were really quite different. The dynamics of electrical prices going forward are also going to be quite different. The minute Site C comes online, it's going to have a ripple effect. The bulk power purchases that your city made, you know, Site C is going to affect the cost of the power that Penticton buys from the big utilities. So don't assume this is the way it is just because it is. This is something that you should work on changing. And I think as you see people start to add the solar panels, you're going to build a constituency, right? Say you get 20% of the people in Penticton put small systems on their roof. How many people vote in municipal elections? 30% at most. So you've already got a vast majority of, you potentially have a vast majority of solar informed voters who can sweep out intransigent city councils and start to shape the energy policy yourself to the benefit of your community. So for sure, it is a thought experiment, but it does sort of lead you down a path. And I think one of those paths is a role for citizens to be overproducers in partnership with the utility. And we have an example of that up in Hudson's Hope.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. We'll come back to that in a minute because I see that there's someone that works for the city that's commenting on that. But before I let Cameron talk in a minute, I know there's quite a few people interested in heat pumps that are attending tonight. And my husband and I were trying to make that switch earlier, and it's not quite so easy. It's a little bit complicated. We're in an older home. I
Mhm.
know that in Kelowna, there's a group that you helped to get going that is doing some bulk purchasing. Could you just talk maybe a minute about some possibilities of communities working together to do things like source some of the materials we need to do retrofitting?
Yeah, there's great examples of buyers co-ops in BC. So there's one on the Gulf Islands, one in the Cowichan Valley, Peace Energy Co-op, and in Kelowna, I think they're trying to do the same thing. And that's just generating enough critical mass where both suppliers and contractors are willing to offer a discount. It's a win-win. A supplier that's bringing in a shipment of heat pumps, if they can bring in double, they can reduce the unit cost. If you have a group of contractors who are familiar with installations of particular units, they can lower their costs. So it's one of those things that, it's just like your Costco, right? It's a cooperative approach to buying and installing. I think, either joining an existing co-op or starting one yourself is a really worthwhile use of time. And I think in terms of like the installation and decisions about like when do you move to a heat pump versus taking care of the envelope, like the windows and the insulation, I leave that up to the energy advisors. You want to find the right energy advisors, not the ones that are in the gas company's back pocket. But yeah, those are the sort of the technical conversations around what does your house look like? And let's not forget, every single house is different. Every house is going to have airflow movement that's different from their neighbors, different building envelopes, different windows, different insulation. So these energy advisors, they're actually pretty important. They're important parts of this transition.
Thanks, Dave. Cameron Bond has some insight into the city operating itself as an electrical utility. Cameron, maybe you could comment.
Yeah. And again, I don't work for the city. Actually, I don't even work for the regional district anymore.
That's right. Pardon me.
But what I just know is just looking at some of the documents when staff brought forward the idea of really stopping the subsidy for electric power from solar panels, and what they were in favor of was basically just paying the utility, that the people that were producing their own power, the base rate that they were paying Fortis. A big chunk of that is because you have to understand that with the 0% tax freezes that the city's done, city management has to make money. And this is one of the ways they make money. The utility here is making money every time they sell a kilowatt of power. They're making money on top of that. So there's the disincentive for conservation in the city of Penticton right now. I think you're seeing council, they'll go the other direction. Council fought against staff that were in favor of having this minimal amount of payment back for energy coming in from solar panels. And really, it could have really destroyed people that have already made those choices to go in and put those panels on their roof. City council made the right decision to still subsidize and incentivize those people to do that. But I think going back to the last one on the heat pumps, like I think if we're going to co-op, maybe work with the city and the utility so that we can better manage how those panels are going into people's roofs, maybe do bulk purchases, work with the college to see how we can install them, work with roofers so we know that people are getting fair pricing for the roofing that needs to be done, the electrical stuff that needs to be done for it. There's a lot of steps that need to be done to do it safely and properly. And then if the city's involved more, then they can also look at one of their key things they're looking at right now is that peak demand, where they're seeing those peaks during the heat of the day. So that's where the panels can maybe come in and assist them. So there could be some real benefit to them. In the end, if they're involved and they're able to get the grants, the subsidies, or even just the purchasing power, and it saves money. If they're getting electricity from here, from Fortis, they're still paying money. The key problem is that their current business plan now is to get more money from fees and less money from taxes. I think people have to recognize that's a huge barrier for staff, and they will not be in favor of anything really earth-shattering or groundbreaking that affects their business model unless they can be assured that they're not going to have to fire people and cut services because people are just being Penticton hate seeing tax increases. So yeah.
Those are great comments, Cameron. I hope that we I know we will miss you at the RDOS. Hopefully you're still in the community doing good things as you have been for many years.
Thanks.
Cameron.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you guys too. Hopefully you guys stick around for a while and have a good summer break.
right. Jim had a comment just about our use of energy in general. Jim, do you want to unmute yourself?
Well, yeah, I guess my question, I wrote a question in which I guess I could just read. Um, I guess my thinking is that is there a danger that, I mean, you make a lot of very strong points about the economic benefits of being the first in line to, to make all the changes that are obviously very good for reducing carbon, but I don't really see a sea change in the Canadian public or the American public or the British public or any Western country. To not reduce their ultimately unsustainable standard of living, while the rest of the world stays rather poor. So I fear for any ideological approach which doesn't say that we are living beyond our means.
I hear that, and I have no disagreement with that.
But I don't hear it in your presentation.
Yeah, I think, and I'm absolutely open to being challenged on this point. I guess the tactical decision that we made was that the electrification of everything was going to be the only thing that we could do that we could do that people could grasp in the time that we have. So all the things that you say about unsustainability impacting all of our planetary systems are true. And there's no right answer to say which problem is less or more important than the other. So I'll just tell you where I've landed on it. And where I've landed on it is just, it's the top. For me, it's the piece that's at the top. It's the piece that if we don't solve, we don't have any other options to solve all those other problems. And the other problems around like dismantling capitalism and changing the way industrial society approaches living on the planet, those are 200-year-old entrenched habits. I think the use of energy is less entrenched, and it's one that's easier to unwind. So if we focus on the energy switch, even though we're still using the same amount of energy and ergo potentially just as unsustainable from sort of a footprint perspective, at least we stop the emissions and the poison and part of the poison and a lot of the drilling and extraction and shipment. So we stop a lot of the toxins, we stop those emissions. That gives us a little bit of breathing room to then maybe sit back and take a harder look at our lifestyle. And I think that, in my mind anyway, and again, this is where I think I'm open to being challenged on this mindset. In my mind, it's a longer conversation and a more difficult conversation. Whereas if you tell someone like, you can still have your truck, it just won't be, and it's going to be a better truck. Like that's what Canadians want right now. Like, what do we buy? 189,000 brand new F-150s last year. It's like, you can still have your truck. It's just not gonna change our climate. So I hear you. I agree with you. From a strategic campaigning perspective, that carbon piece and that transition from fossil to electric, for me, it's at the top still. But it does pain me to say that.
Thank you.
I think one good bad thing is that both electricity and fossil fuels are going to become expensive. In BC, we're going to be paying for Site C electricity. And obviously with carbon tax, everyone's going to be paying more to drive their fossil fuel using cars, so that electric cars will seem much more feasible. That's the good thing that we're facing as carbon prices ramp up. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so okay, I will take yours, Anne. Go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on that. In my work in climate change, I also used to work for the regional district, and it was the most bizarre thing where we had this inverse cost where natural gas was so incredibly cheap they were almost giving it away, and we're trying to convince people to not do that. And at the same time, electricity became very expensive in BC, and I don't know how much carbon tax we can put on natural gas and other fossil fuels to get people to switch, but it's gotta happen, and it's gotta be major to dissuade people.
Well, one of the things, we're going to put this in chat. There are federal government incentives coming, and there are right now rebates from the provincial government to switch to away from natural gas to get electric heat pumps. So have a look at what's offered in Clean BC rebate page. I also want to remind you that we've been talking about it coming over the past year, but we are launching the city of Penticton is launching a new climate and emissions plan that I hope you'll all get involved in commenting on. And I think one of the things is that paradigm shift, obviously our city needs to have as an electrical utility to make use of solar, if only for, say, the costs of peak shaving, for them having to buy electricity when it's very expensive, or to cope with the additional heat that we're going to be coping with in the summer. So please do pay attention to the plan that's going to be launched in the fall. And also our regional district is also now going to be getting more involved in community and corporate action planning. So hopefully we'll be featuring these in future deep dive presentations. We're taking a break for the summertime. I encourage you to join our First Things First newsletter to keep track of all the programs we're offering. And also Dogwood has a local power team section of their website. You can join that and you can get updates on webinars that Dogwood is offering. Anything else you'd like to say about some of the Dogwood initiatives, Dave?
We are having a Beyond Gas campaign launch on the 30th. I'll send an email around. Anyone can join that. And speaking of those incentives, I think for the first time in quite some time, there's a $5,000 incentive from the federal government focusing on solar, or at least one that you can use for solar. So there's apparently $5,000 out there for solar from the feds. That's the first time that's happened in a while. So
great.
Yeah.
Lori's put something in the chat, a video of an energy journalist who's talking about how communities can create their own energy and how BC can transition. So if you'd like to save your chat and some of the links that various people have put in, you can go to, at the bottom of the chat box, there's 3 little dots. You can save that file. It'll be called Zoom, the date, and you can have some links in there for your viewing pleasure. Sue and Lori, is there anything I've forgotten before we say goodnight to everyone?
I have a little comment about solar. I did have someone come by and give me an idea about whether I could have solar, whether it would be beneficial for me to do solar on my little house. And my electricity usage was so small, and he said that my cost for gas was so low that I'd be crazy to switch over. At this point, if my hot water heater or my furnace die, then I can consider doing something different. But that was kind of interesting. It was also nice that he didn't push a system on me that I didn't need. No, other things about First Things First, no. I think just follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and please share all of the information to get people to mobilize. One of the things that I just posted was Seth Klein made a new video. It's only 6 minutes long, and it is really powerful. It is to launch the Climate Emergency Unit, which is with the David Suzuki Institute, hopefully to make our government change the way they do things.
Thank you. Any last comments, Sue?
I just noticed that Ted put in the chat about the possibilities of hydropower from the water flow in the channel. And this is something I've also thought about. So I'm kind of curious if anyone has thoughts about why we aren't doing this.
Two quick things is one is I know that the city was looking at solutions to peak power demand. And one of the things they did look at was some water flow options, not necessarily in the Okanagan River channel, but from, I believe, from our some of our water aquifers going down. And it was, you know, they did look at the economy of whether or not it made sense to make use of that. Of course, with our Okanagan River, we've got fish. These are fish-bearing streams. So I think there would definitely be a problem with that. But I believe that all options have been looked at by the city in terms of power demand.
I can make a quick comment on that too, for
Sure.
Ted. You know, when I hear the word channel, I don't necessarily think about the flow speeds that are advantageous for run-of-river turbines. Nonetheless, the amount of roof space that you have in Penticton exceeds your needs for energy. So if you just map the square footage of all your rooftops that are facing the sun, most of them are, there's enough square footage to generate all the power your community needs. And it's way cheaper. So what Site C going to be? It's a bad example, but it's going to be like 18 cents a kilowatt hour. Industrial scale solar is going in at 1 cent a kilowatt hour right now in Alberta. So the cost factor has changed. And I think that's why you hear more about solar these days. No one's building coal plants. No one's building gas plants, you know, in North America or Europe. They're building solar farms and wind farms. Why? Because they're just way cheaper.
Thank you, Dave. That's very inspiring. And I think you've just shown us a new vision and kind of a paradigm shift where we should be perhaps encouraging our city to think of this new way of looking at generating our own power. So thanks so much for this evening, for inspiring us all here in the Okanagan.
It's been a pleasure. Take care, everybody.
All right. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Have a good summer.
Thanks so much.
Stay cool.
Well, that was very good. And I appreciated that so much.
Yeah.
It was. He was great.